What's going on, guys? So we are still out here at Lippert headquarters in this is kind of their marketing building where they do all of their media and video footage. It's super cool. Great team of people. And I still got Tim with me, who is lead engineer. So he has given me a really close-up tour of this frame. This is a toy hauler frame that's already been built. And we started talking about frame flex a little bit more in depth because I wanted to kind of know exactly what was happening. What are people saying is happening? What is actually happening to the frame in some of these cases? Not all of them. Everything's a little different. But Tim, can you kind of explain to my audience what you explained to me?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit earlier about the superstructure and the chassis and how the two of them integrate together. And so here's a raw chassis that we've got sitting here, and you can see the holes. So these are the holes where typically you'd run a lag bolt and you'd lag into the wall. So that's going to attach the wall to the chassis again, so that the superstructure and the chassis are working together.
Yeah, the manufacturer sidewall.
Correct.
Yes, this
Correct.
is the part that the RV manufacturer puts on.
The RV manufacturer would add bolts through here and also screws up through this side strap here, the sidewall strap here, and that ties the two of them together. And some of them do some other things that are proprietary to again maintain that attachment. And so while they're attached and they're working together, you've got one nice holistic structure. So what typically will happen though is if something comes apart, so either the bolts loosen up or something happens, there's damage to the sidewall, now that superstructure is no longer working with the chassis.
So when you say damage, water intrusion could have delaminated the material perhaps, or maybe they went over something that caused the frame or sidewall to get damaged to some degree is what you're referring to.
Or somebody gets too close to a tree and hits, I mean, it might be something that seems pretty innocuous that you wouldn't necessarily think was actually a contributing factor, but then it spirals or it builds, if you will. So what happens is now the wall's not carrying as much of the load as it had been. And so the load moves back and it moves to this high stress area. And so when you get to the high stress area here, now this joint that wasn't really carrying the load before it's carrying all of it. And you'll start to see where it becomes a problem.
Okay, so whenever the sidewall is put on the upper deck, this entire section right here is designed to be rigid with the sidewall in place because the sidewall is, and the roof and the front cap are carrying part of that load.
Correct.
If any part of it becomes detached right here, all of a sudden, let's just say the sidewall can shift up or down right here. Well, this piece right here now has the capability of small fluctuations, small flexes, because the wall's no longer rigid.
You'll see it moving inside of the house. And so all the frame flex videos that there are out there, you can actually see where the pin box portion is moving relative to the walls.
Yep.
They're not moving together anymore.
And right off the bat, when that first starts happening, it's not to say you're going to have like instant damage anywhere here. It's going to cause any major problems. But over time, just like we talk about with anything that involves flex and fatigue, even aircraft, over time, if something moves, expands, contracts, moves up and down in a way that it's not designed to, then you could potentially have cracks. You could have failure. You could have parts that break simply because a part that should be attached right here has let go. It's no longer supporting its share of the load, and all of that weight, that extra weight, is now being transferred to an area that's not intentionally designed to carry that load.
Correct.
Okay, that's a pretty dang good answer to the question that a lot of people have regarding it. And this is why it's so important, if you feel you have frame flex, that you get it investigated immediately, because if you don't get this wall situation fixed here right away, you do run the risk, you do run the risk that over time, over towing it across the US and across highways and bumpy roads, that this part will start to move more than it should because it's no longer sharing the load with the sidewall, with the roof, and with the front cap, and that weight can transfer to this area, which can eventually lead the frame to failing or cracking or having some type of a break that shouldn't be there.
I wouldn't call it a failure because it can be repaired.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely more complex than it would be if it were fixed when it was in its early stages.
So that's why when this happens, and this starts to occur right here where there's damage, when they put the weight back down, that's why they see things start to settle back in place, because it's taking all the weight off and this is just resting down again. So that to me is like the most comprehensive answer as to why a lot of people who are experiencing what they call frame flex are experiencing it, and the frame is just doing what it's designed to do. The flex is taking place because it's over flexing, because the sidewall, the roof, the front cap are not carrying the weight they're supposed to carry anymore.
Correct.
Whew, that was a good one, man. I was trying to find out a really good way of explaining this to folks who are having the problem, and more importantly, again, if you catch yourself in a scenario where you think you have that issue, it behooves someone to try to get it fixed as soon as possible. But now that we understand where it's coming from, I can almost guarantee you a lot of people just didn't know that it's because the sidewall's detaching. We talked about that in the fireside chat when we said detachment, but they didn't know what that meant. Where was it detaching? If it's detaching right here in this section, right here, and it's moving independently of the frame all of a sudden, or even if it's a small movement, it doesn't have to be much, that stress now is no longer carried by the wall, and it's transferring right here to a point that it should not be transferring to exclusively. Yeah, and that's what's causing the problem.
It's not always detaching, and again, like we talked about, if the
the wall could be broken
inside there and it's moving. That's why people a lot of times will refer to the wall as part of the frame, because it is the superstructure. There is framing in there, and that is a part of the overall frame of the RV.
No, and that makes perfect sense.
And that's why we call this the chassis.
Yep.
To differentiate between those two.
Well, and you made a great example. This is not a gooseneck trailer. It's not like your typical hot shot lowboy deck over tandem axle trailer that you see going down the road hauling a big Caterpillar, piece of equipment on the back.
Correct.
This isn't designed for that. This is designed for an entirely different purpose, and they design it to work in conjunction with the body of the RV. And when that unison there, when that coupling of the two fails, that's where you're asking the frame to carry a load that it wasn't asked to carry initially.
Correct.
Very cool. Did I answer all this?
Yeah.
Did this make sense? I think the viewers needed to hear this because this is such an important piece of it. So again, it all comes down to how a manufacturer is pairing the wall, the roof, the front cap, that whole superstructure to the frame of the RV, because they have to be married. They have to work well together and live in harmony, unity together, because the minute there's a fight there, that's where things turn ugly.
For sure.
Okay, so Tim, the next logical question people are going to ask is, why don't you build this like a gooseneck trailer, like a commercial over-the-road hot shot gooseneck trailer that you see carrying, skid steers and excavators down the road?
Okay, so we could do that. The challenge with that is going to be that's going to add a lot of extra weight over the front, which creates a whole separate engineering challenge in the back in order to keep my hitch weight into something that I can tow with a truck that your average user is going to be able to have. Mm-hmm. And so if I move my axis forward, now my rear overhang gets bigger, and now I've potentially created a separate structural issue back there. As well, you may lose some of the other functionality of a fifth wheel. I mean, if you look at the way that a gooseneck trailer is constructed and the way that the beams come up, if I make that real tall and it runs through the center, now I can't use the space, or I lose 12 inches of headroom in that front area where we're using it as bedroom space.
Yeah, and traditionally gooseneck trailers run 12-inch I-beams or C-beams way up, but then they come to a V shape at the front.
Correct.
And you reinforce that V shape, but you don't have the space to actually build an upper deck. So the people who have converted gooseneck trailers into RVs typically have a super tall upper deck because they're building a platform on top of two 12-inch I-beams that are essentially merging at the hitch point. And it's just not designed that way. And to your point, even my relatively light gooseneck trailer has like a 1,600-pound hitch weight when it's empty. And this thing's super short because the steel material they put up there is massive because they know what you're going to be carrying. You're going to be moving a skid steer all the way up to the front, and then you're going to load a Bobcat or something behind it. And the way you carry that weight is entirely different across these trailers.
Well, and on a utility trailer with a really heavy hitch weight, you can move where the cargo is on the trailer to adjust your hitch weight. With a fifth wheel, you can move some of your cargo around, but most of the componentry and the weight in it is actually fixed. And so we have to start out with a number that's reasonable, and there's a limited amount to be able to adjust it after the fact.
Okay, so now that we've looked at a frame by itself, we've moved out to the main lobby of their facility so we can look at an actual fifth wheel that's completely put together. Because when you look at a frame, you're only seeing one aspect of things, right? We came back out here because we felt it was really important to show you what we were talking about. Well, we can't really show you because this isn't experiencing it. But there are some expectations you need to be aware of. So before you think that any movement at all, or any time the pin box moves in any way, relative to the RV chassis, something's wrong, you have to understand a few things. So I'm going to let Tim take an opportunity here to explain what else you need to look for and what's considered normal.
Awesome, thanks. So yesterday we talked a lot about the chassis and the superstructure and how the two of them integrate together and how they work together to provide the totality of your RV structure. And so you can't see it here, but behind the sidewall and behind the front cap is what we call the upper deck part of the chassis, and it goes back to this area where it drops down, and we looked at that part yesterday. And then out here we've got the kingpin that we talked about yesterday. And the thing that everybody needs to keep in mind is when you hook this into the truck, you've got your vertical forces here, and that creates a twisting load. So the box is wanting to twist like this, and you'll see movement in this area, and that's totally to be expected. That's absolutely normal. We expect that you're going to see some flex there. What we want to keep an eye out for, though, is if you start to see this whole assembly moving up inside the house.
So basically like the front nose is staying stationary, but only this assembly right here is elevating
and
up.
not just moving, but actually moving up inside there. That's when you need to take a little bit closer look.
That's when detachment could be occurring, right?
Correct.
You have this structure right here, which is integral into the entire structure of the RV, separating from some aspect of the frame itself, and that's where you're going to see this totally independent movement here. But this is a big cantilever coming off the front. Correct. And it's just naturally going to have some flex that's integrated into it. Yep. And you want that because you don't want the metal to shear just because it's so rigid, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Rigidity brings stress.
Absolutely. And that's the thing a lot of people may not realize sometimes is they look at a product and they're like, well, if I see any movement at all, something's wrong. But from an engineering standpoint, like the first video I made back at the ranch when I talked about this, all structures have to have some type of flex built into them. So yeah, Tim, so I really appreciate that, and I think it really took coming out here and seeing a unit up close to explain what you should look for and what is completely normal.
Yeah, and so if this is moving up inside there, that's when you start to see, the trim popping off and maybe issues with the closet doors and the other type of symptoms that people with frame flex are
yeah, an example of that would be maybe if it's still attached, this whole assembly is still attached on one side, but it's not attached on the other side anymore, or it wasn't attached properly. When you start to lift up, well, this side is going to want to lift separately from that side. That side's going to follow lifting motion of the frame. This side won't, and that's where things start to twist inside and you start to see failure. And again, that failure can occur for a lot of reasons. People don't often know that if you've had water damage can cause a failure of your structure above the frame because it causes things to detach. Wall damage can cause those same things. So all the things we talked about yesterday are the things that you want to be very cautious of. Again, you made a really great point that something that might seem kind of innocuous could absolutely be something more important than you're thinking, and it only shows itself as you go down the road and things get worse and worse. Very good. Tim, I definitely appreciate it. I hope you all kind of understand what we're focusing in on here, because it is important for those of you who are wondering if you're experiencing it. And this aspect of what he showed right here, I think, is critically important for those of you who want to see if perhaps what you think is frame flex might actually just be normal movement. All right. Anyways, guys, I sure hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.